be here every morning, be the calm I feel, be the beauty I behold, all the days I'm here, be here to remind me of all the goodness I have known, be the heart that holds on tight, don't let me let it go.
I don't know what you think about when you watch that video. I showed a rough cut of that video to my family about a month ago, and they were all immediately asking one question, and I suspect it's probably the same question that you're asking right now after watching that video. You're probably wanting to know, why are the eyes all scratched out? What's that all about? And so when I sat down with our communications director to start talking about this series a couple of months ago now, I sat down with Miguel, and Miguel is like one of these creative geniuses. And he sat down and he said, Brandon, as I listened to you talk about this upcoming series, you've told us it's a really big deal. You told us it's more important to you than Easter and Christmas. And so I'm trying to understand like this series, but I get a feeling that you're not talking to the people that you normally talk to at Mosaic. And so we talked a little bit about it, and I said, Miguel, I really do believe that the people who come to Mosaic every single week, they're going to get a lot out of this series, but this series is not really for them. I'm not so much concerned in this series about all the people who are already here. I really am concerned about the people who are not really even here yet. And so in a very real way, this series is a series that's been designed for people who might be first-time guests, who might have heard about this series, who might have seen an ad on Facebook, who might have been here for Christmas Eve and you decided to come back just to see what this thing was all about. This series is really designed for people who are atheists. It's designed for people who are agnostics. It's designed for people who are skeptics. It's designed for people who are even critical of Christianity. This is one of those series that's designed for people who feel really, really far from God. This is a series that I think God wants to use to help people who have all kinds of doubts and questions. I think this is one of those series for people on the Gulf Coast who say, I don't even know what I think about God. And it's even for the people on the Gulf Coast who would say, quite frankly, I don't even really care at all about God. That really is who this series is for, because I really think that that's who the Gospel of John is for. I've lived in Ocean Springs now for about 5 years, and in that time, I've become convinced of a couple of things. As I get to know people on the coast, I have run into a lot of people who either can't see their need for God or they don't see their need for God, and that's why the eyes are all scratched out. And so when we talked through the video, Miguel went to work in his creative suite, and then he came back and he showed me the video. And as soon as I saw the video that he created, I immediately fell in love with it because it highlights the issue that I want to talk about here at Mosaic for the next 5 weeks. And so I want to jump in tonight, week 1. On December 14th, just about 3 weeks ago now, Pew Research Center came out with an article in which they reported that 3 out of every 10 Americans no longer affiliate with religion of any kind. Now, I want you to think about that. 3 out of every 10 Americans, they no longer affiliate with religion of any kind. I know when I was growing up as a young man, everybody I knew seemed to go to church. And if you had told me just 30 years ago that there would be a time in my lifetime that we would see that 1/3 of the American population says, I don't have anything to do with religion, and I'm not sure if I ever want to have anything to do with religion, I probably would have called you a liar. And yet that's where we are in America today. When they go take the survey, they're asked all kinds of questions. Are you a Christian? No. Are you Jewish? No. Are you Muslim? No. Instead, they're checking a brand new box that wasn't even on the survey a long, long time ago. They're checking a box today that is called none. It really is people's way of saying that I don't affiliate with religion of any kind, and I'm not even sure if I ever want to affiliate with religion of any kind. And so as I thought about that, I really did want to start this brand new series here at Mosaic, and I wanted to start with this question. Would the death of religion in America be a good thing or a bad thing? Now, I know Christians well enough to know that makes a lot of old school Christians who have grown up in church all their life, makes them really uneasy. In fact, some of you are kind of squirming in your seat right now going, I don't know where this is going, but man, it makes me really uncomfortable. And I would just say that the reason we have to start with that question in this new series is because that's where Americans are today. Americans are in a place where they are now traveling down a road that they have never traveled down before. In fact, there are some very prolific authors and writers and speakers who are not just arguing that religion is no longer the answer. They are actually arguing that religion really is the problem. And because of that, they believe they're writing books, they're creating podcasts, they're infiltrating college classrooms, and they're suggesting over and over again that the death of religion would actually be a great thing. In fact, there's a guy by the name of Sam Harris who wrote a book called A Letter to a Christian Nation. In this book, Sam Harris actually argued that we should be abolishing religion in this country in the same way that we abolished slavery in this country. He sees religion as that kind of problem. There's another man by the name of Christopher Hitchens, who was a well-known atheist, who wrote a book that was called God is Not Great: How Religion Poisons Everything. Even the subtitle of his book lets you know that he sees religion as a massive problem in the world today. And so I would just say to all of us, Christian, non-Christian, believers, unbelievers, I would say that if that's where our country is, if those are the books that are sitting on the New York Times bestseller list, if those are the kinds of conversations that students are hearing in the classroom, if those are the kinds of claims that people are making, then all of us would benefit from asking the question, would the death of religion in America be a good thing or would it be a bad thing? Listen, Americans are traveling down a road, and that road is going to take this country somewhere. And so all of us would be better off if we would actually take a little bit of time and think about whether or not this road is going to take us to a good place or is it going to take this country to a really bad place. If we wake up 50 years from now and religion in this country is almost non-existent, will America be a far better place to live or will America be a far worse place to live? I know you probably have thoughts about that question, and I'll tell you, I've got thoughts about that question, but what ultimately matters is I wonder what Jesus would say about that question. If you're here and you don't know a lot about Jesus, I really do think that his answer would surprise you. See, Jesus would say that the death of religion in this country, it would actually be a good thing. If you don't believe me, I want you to go back and I want you to read some books in the New Testament, books like Matthew, Mark, Luke, or I want to invite you to hang around for our new study in the Gospel of John, because what you will see over and over again is that throughout these books that detail the life and the teachings of Jesus, is you will see that Jesus saw religion as a troubling thing. Jesus saw religion as the problem, not the solution. You can read these books and see it for yourself, that when Jesus was in conflict with people throughout his life, he was almost always in conflict with people who were a part of the religious establishment. That this is just who Jesus was. And so if you're walking in for the first time and you're sitting here going, man, I got a real problem with religion, I would tell you, you actually have something in common with Jesus. You may even be more like Jesus than you would care to admit. Now, maybe the difference between Jesus and the way that so many other people in our world feel today is that while Jesus had a problem with religion, Jesus was not ready to throw the baby out with the bathwater. Jesus knew that religion was a problem in his day because the religious establishment was not representing God in the way in which they needed to represent God. And so Jesus would actually create a revolution that is still being felt in this world today, I want to remind you. And it was a revolution that would actually lead people away from religion, but it would also lead them to God. See, I want you to understand that religion and God are not the same thing. Religion isn't about God. Religion is about rules, and religion is all about control. That's not who Jesus was. And that's why I would say to you tonight that I'm not really all that concerned if you say, I'm ready to walk away from religion, or I don't affiliate with religion of any kind. But I also want you to know, on the other hand, that I am very concerned with whether or not you affiliate with Jesus. In fact, when I look at that survey and I see that lots and lots of people are checking a box called none, that is very concerning to me, because what it suggests is that people are walking away from one thing and they're walking to nothing. People are walking away from something and they don't even know, they're not even thinking about what they're walking to. Not Jesus. Jesus understood how to walk away from religion without walking away from God. In fact, I go back to that article about the Pew Research Center study, and the most disturbing part of that study for me was this. They reported that Christians continue to make up a majority of the U.S. populace, but, and it's a big but, their share of the adult population is 12 points lower in 2021 than it was in 2011. It's not a big span of time. In 2011, 75% of Americans said, I affiliate with Jesus. In 2021, that number had dropped 12 percentage points to only 63%. I want you to think about this. If that trend continues in this country, then in 50 years, you can look in this country and it will be very, very hard for you to find a person who claims to be a follower of Jesus. In 50 years, Christians in America will be on the brink of extinction. And if that happens, I'm telling you, America really will be a far worse place to live. And I'm going to tell you why tonight. When the light goes out, darkness always takes over. If we were to turn the lights out in the room right now, darkness would take over this room. If the light goes out in your life, darkness will take over your life. If the light goes out in your family, darkness is going to take over your family. And if the light goes out in this world, darkness is going to take over this world. And it's one of the reasons that we all need God, even though we may agree that we don't necessarily need religion. In fact, that's exactly where John begins as he begins to write about this man named Jesus. He tells us that the reason that we need Jesus, the reason that we need God, is because through Jesus, God is going to bring some things to our world that our world desperately needs. You're going to see a lot of things over the course of this first chapter, but the first thing that you're going to see is that when Jesus came, he brought light into the darkness. I want to pick it up at the beginning of John chapter 1, verses 1 through 5. John writes, and he says this, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." Last week, Jeremy kind of introduced this entire study by telling you a little bit about the guy who wrote this book, a guy named John. Now, I believe that it's important for you to understand who wrote the book, because who wrote the book in this particular case gives a lot of credibility to the book. The guy who wrote the book is a guy named John, but John, more importantly, was an eyewitness to everything that Jesus said and did over the course of the 3 most important years of his life on this earth. Now, it's not just important for you to know who wrote it. I need you to also know tonight when the book was written. John sat down and he wrote this book somewhere toward the end of the 1st century, probably around 90 AD, give or take 10 years. And so he sits down and he's writing this book, and I need you to get this. He's writing this book literally decades after Jesus has left the earth. By this point in Christian history, we know that 3 other books had already been written that tell us about the life, the person, the teachings of Jesus Christ. There's a book named Matthew, there's a book named Mark, and there's another book named Luke. All 3 of these books were already in circulation by the time that John sits down to write his own account of Jesus' life, his teachings, his compassion, his love, and yes, his death, his burial, and his resurrection. Now, John is writing somewhere around 50 or 60 years after Jesus has left the earth. And so the question is, man, what is John going to write after he's been thinking about Jesus for 50 or 60 years? What is he going to put on paper? What is he going to say? And the very first thing that John says is that Jesus is God. John understands that the world doesn't need religion. What the world really needs is God. And so when he introduces Jesus, he doesn't introduce Jesus as rabbi or teacher, even though people always referred to Jesus as rabbi or teacher. When he goes to introduce Jesus, he doesn't introduce him as prophet, even though a lot of people saw Jesus as a kind of prophet. Instead, what John does is John comes right out of the gate and he makes it very, very clear that Jesus was God. It is without question the most radical claim that Jesus ever made in his life. In fact, this is the claim right here that got Jesus crucified. I need you to know this. They did not crucify Jesus because he healed the sick. They didn't crucify Jesus because he fed the hungry. They didn't crucify Jesus because he performed miracles. They didn't crucify Jesus because he cared for orphans and widows. The reason they crucified Jesus is because he claimed to be God. And that claim is what caused a lot of people on the front end of this revolution to say, we're not just going to follow Jesus, we're actually going to worship Jesus. This claim right here is the reason that some people followed and worshiped, but it's also the same reason that some people walked away and even hated Jesus. They hated him because they could not believe that this dude had the audacity to make that kind of claim. And so when John starts to write about this man named Jesus, he starts with the claim that has made Jesus the most controversial figure in all of human history. He starts with the words, "In the beginning was the Word. The Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning." And so Jesus wasn't just with God. John says that Jesus was God. Now, the question that I have is, why in the world did God become a man? I mean, you can go back and you can read history for yourself. And if you go back and you read history, what you'll discover is that there were a lot of men who tried to become God, but nobody thought, and I mean nobody thought, that God would become a man. And so you can go read history for yourself and you'll discover that there were emperors, there were kings, there were pharaohs, there were Caesars, and yes, there have been a lot of cult leaders who were all saying, man, I'm going to be God. And they tried to be God. But no one ever thought that God was going to become a man. This story is not the kind of story that people make up. And so the question for us is, why in the world did God become a man? John tells us. In verses 4 through 9, this is what he wrote of the first chapter. "In him was life, and that life was the light of all mankind. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John." This is not the John who wrote this book. This is actually John the Baptist, totally different guy. But he, John the Baptist, he came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself, John himself, was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. And so John makes it pretty clear. The reason that Jesus came into the world is because humanity was living in darkness. Now, that's a problem for a lot of people. A lot of people don't even like that word darkness. In fact, there are a lot of people in our world today who honestly struggle with the notion of God because God and Jesus and the Bible, they continually use these categories and these terms that make a lot of people uncomfortable. They come back to these categories that most people don't like or even agree with. And so we start right here with the first two in the Gospel of John. We see the words light and darkness, but I'll give you a lot more. You're going to see other language throughout this study, throughout the words of Jesus. Not just light and darkness, but right and wrong, truth and lies, God and Satan, good and evil, righteous and wicked, heaven and hell. These are common words that are often used by Jesus throughout his life. And yet, people in our world today, they don't like those words because those words are absolutes. People don't like absolutes. People like to live in areas of gray, not areas of black and white. And the reason this is such a problem for so many people is because they instinctively, maybe even on a subconscious level, they understand that if I acknowledge those categories or if I agree with those categories, then that suggests that there might be some things that I want to do that I cannot do. And it's not just me, the same is true in your life as well. In fact, if we really want to be honest tonight and talk about categories that make people uncomfortable in our culture today, we would have to talk about other biblical categories like male and female, like husband and wife. And the reason people don't like these categories today is because they understand that those categories, they might actually have implications for our sexuality. And so if I agree or I acknowledge those categories, then I might not be able to do some of the things that I want to do. It's why so many people are uncomfortable talking about God, or they like talking about God, but they don't really like talking about Satan. It's why so many people are comfortable talking and thinking about and longing for heaven, but we don't really want to acknowledge a place called hell. And so what we do is we remove certain words from our vocabulary altogether. And I just want you to know that's a pretty common problem that's been around for a really long time. In fact, there's an Old Testament prophet whose name was Isaiah. And Isaiah was actually writing about 400 years before Jesus ever even came into the world. And all the way back in his day, about 2,400 years ago, Isaiah had to address this very problem. I want you to listen to what he said in Isaiah chapter 5, verse 20. He said, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil, who put darkness for light and light for darkness." Now, that word woe at the very beginning is a really important word to understand. And so, like, some of you are teenagers, so it'd be easy for you to get this. Like if you're a teenage guy and like you're moving in for the kill at the end of the night and you're trying to, kiss the girl and she says, "Whoa," that means stop. Like get up out of my grill, right? If you're riding down the street with your parents and they're letting you drive because you just got your permit or you just got your license and you're coming up on a stop sign or a parked car, your parents are over there and they're freaking out because they don't know if you're going to stop. And so they're over there grabbing the dashboard going, "Whoa," right? That's not what this term means in this context, okay? I want you to get this. According to Bible Gateway, the term woe was an exclamation of judgment upon God's enemies, or of misfortune on oneself, or in the ministry of Jesus, it was an expression of sadness over those who fail to recognize the true misery of their condition. And so when Jesus looks at people who confuse good and evil, when Jesus looks at people who confuse light and darkness, he says, "Woe." He sees their inability to recognize the true misery of their condition. That's why Isaiah says, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil. Woe to those who confuse light and darkness." And yet, that is exactly where we are in this country today. There are all kinds of behaviors that were once condemned by God in this book, and they were also condemned by our society, and they're no longer being condemned. In fact, those behaviors have gone from being condemned to being tolerated to actually being celebrated. And so we throw parties, and we throw parades, and we throw beads, and we don't just change the law so that we can allow for an abortion. Instead, we go one step further and we celebrate the freedom of choice. We actually have awards ceremonies in this country for people who work in the adult film industry so that we can give them awards for the things that they do on film to gratify people's gross sexual desires. Now, I understand and I know that these are, in some cases, very sensitive issues. I know that these are heavy issues, and in some cases, they're very complex issues. But these are also a very clear picture of a group of people who have taken what God has said is evil and we have decided that we will call it good. We don't condemn it. We don't just tolerate it. We actually celebrate it. Isaiah warned us about this about 2,400 years ago. He says that we shouldn't just be careful that we take evil things and we declare them to be good, but he warns us against taking good things and declaring those things to be evil. In fact, the reason that there's so much tension in the room right now is because everyone in the room understands that I'm up here and I'm walking on eggshells, right? Because we all know that we can teach on certain subjects in this book, and if we're not really, really careful in how we teach them, we can get into all kinds of trouble. In fact, everyone knows that to teach on certain subjects from this book, it is a really, really tricky business these days, because you can teach on sensitive and complex subjects in the most loving, caring, compassionate way, and people in our culture today will condemn it as hate speech. It is what Isaiah had in mind when he says they will call what is good evil, and they will call evil things good. The confusion that exists in this country today is one of the reasons that Jesus actually came into the world. And I would say to you, it's one of the reasons that we all need God. Darkness is a real problem in our world, and I want to show you why. I don't know who said it first, but a lot of people have said it. Ugly things grow in the dark. And I want you to know this. The opposite is also true. It's not just that ugly things grow in the dark, but we also know that beautiful, amazing, healthy things, they grow in the light. And so think with me about the ugly things that grow in the dark. If you don't believe that, I want you to go home tonight and I want you to dig down deep into the shower drain and I want you to pull out whatever's in there, and then you come back next week and you tell me whether or not ugly things grow in the dark. If you can't get down in that shower drain, then pull out the old refrigerator and look at what's growing under your refrigerator, and you will see that disgusting things grow in the dark. And the same is true in our lives. People in our world know that, and yet they still deny that to be true. There are a lot of people in our world who do not even acknowledge the existence of things like sin and Satan and darkness because they're not living in reality. If you listen to the people and you read the people who deny things like sin and Satan and darkness, what you'll discover is that more times than not, they're sitting in an office by themselves writing a book. They're sitting in a classroom delivering a lecture. They're sitting in a recording studio recording a podcast. And while they do those things, they sit there and they don't engage in a two-sided discussion. Instead, what they do is they present a one-sided argument, and they say things like, well, we should just never judge people. We should just let people do the things that make them happy. We should just love people and accept people, and we should affirm people, and we should just let people do whatever they want to do. It's their life, it's their choice, it's their freedom. Let them just live their life. And what happens is they sit in a classroom or in a podcast studio where they only present one side of the argument, and then as a pastor, I have to sit there and I have to deal with the other side of the argument. They sit there and talk about it in theory, but I have to sit there and deal with it in real life. Because when people go down this path in life where they say, I'm going to do whatever I want to do, and I'm going to do whatever makes me most happy, other people get hurt in the process. And pastors are the one who are sitting there trying to comfort them and trying to love them and trying to lead them and give them hope that the pieces of their life that have been broken and shattered by darkness, they really can be put back together again with the help of God's mercy, the help of God's grace, and the help of God's truth. when people just do whatever they want to do, when people just go through life saying, I'm going to do whatever makes me happy, more times than not, they hurt themselves and they hurt the people that they care about the most. And it's why those arguments and those books, they may sound really good and they may sound loving, but they don't hold water in the real world. When the light goes out, darkness always takes over. And you and I both know that darkness is not just a scary place to live, but darkness is the place where people often get hurt. Some of you know that because of your own life experiences. In fact, some of you have felt the darkness take over your own life. And as you look back on that season of your life, you can see very, very clearly how it was one of the most destructive seasons of your entire life. You can see how all the people that you cared about, all the things that you cared about, and all of the dreams that you cared about, they got destroyed by the darkness. Some of you have lived through it yourself, like I have. Some of you have seen family members who have been consumed by the darkness. You've seen the depression consume them. You've seen the alcohol consume them. You've seen the drugs consume them. And you were the one who ended up paying the price because they were living in darkness. Some of you have battled the darkness of depression. Some of you have seen close loved ones who have battled the darkness of depression that drives them to the brink or maybe even over the cliff called suicide. And so, people like Dawkins and Harris and all the others can sit around and they can debate it all day long, but eventually life will teach you that darkness is not just a real thing, it is a real problem. There is a reason that you are instinctively afraid of the dark, and there is a reason that you are instinctively comforted by the light. Anybody ever walk down a dark alley in New Orleans late at night? That crap is scary, don't lie, right? It's terrifying, right? And just like there's something scary about the dark, there really is something comforting about the light. And so, yes, people can talk about it on an intellectual level all they want, but it doesn't work on a practical level. And this right here is why Jesus came into the world. He came into the world. He called himself the light of the world because he came in to expose all that is going on in the darkness. And he came into the world to comfort us with the light. The question is, what do we do with the light of the world? There are a lot of people who do not like the light of the world. In fact, John tells us that they actually reject the light. Listen to what he said in verses 10 and 11 as he talks about the way people respond to Jesus, he talks about the way people respond to the light of the world. Verse 10, talking about Jesus, he says that he, Jesus, was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Now, why would people not receive him? Why is it that people rejected Jesus then, and why is it that people continue to reject him now? I'm going to tell you right here, right now, it has nothing to do with science. A lot of you may be sitting here going, no. It has a lot to do with science because science conflicts with a lot of things that you Christians believe, and so it has a lot to do with science. Not really. There's a much deeper issue that's driving that. A lot of people might think, well, they don't follow Jesus and believe in the teachings of Jesus because they kind of look at some of the Gospels and they think there's some contradictions in there and some things that don't quite match up. I'm telling you, it's not that. It's not the credibility of the four Gospels or the credibility of the Bible. Those questions and concerns can be easily answered. Jesus himself actually told us why people reject the light or why they rejected him. He says it just a couple of chapters later in the book of John, John chapter 3, verse 19. Jesus said, "This is the verdict. Light has come into the world, but people loved darkness instead of the light because their deeds were evil. The reason that we don't like the light is because it exposes all of the evil things in our lives. And yet, without the light, the darkness, it really will take over. It will take over your life. It will take over your family. It will take over this community. It will take over this country, and it will take over this world if we continue to reject Jesus, the light of the world. There's a band that's pretty popular right now. They're called the Avett Brothers. I don't think that they're a Christian band at all, but they have a song called Head Full of Doubt. I'm not going to sing it for you because that would make us all just want to go home. I'm a terrible singer. But I will read it to you. In that song, they say this. They say, "There's a darkness upon me that's flooded the light. In the fine print, they tell me what's wrong and what's right. There's a darkness upon us that's flooded the light, and I'm frightened by those who don't see it." I've got to tell you that I am frightened by the growing number of people in our world who don't see the reality of darkness and what it's doing to people all around us. For those of you who do see the reality of darkness, maybe you've been denying it before tonight, but you're walking in here and you're listening with an open mind, and you're acknowledging that, yes, darkness is a real thing and a real problem. I want you to know this about Jesus. The story of Jesus is not bad news. It's actually the story of good news. It's a story about the fact that we were all living in darkness, but there is a God who loves us so much that he didn't just invade our world. He sent his son as the light who could invade our darkness. He came into the world, and through the light of Jesus Christ, the sin in our lives all got exposed. And it wasn't exposed so that God could condemn us. It was exposed so that he could forgive us. And that's the beauty of the light of Jesus Christ. He came into the world because he loves us, and he wants to shine a light in our lives that will light up the path so that we can all make our way back to God. It's true. It's what you need in your life, and it's why I need God in my life. In fact, MLK himself once said, "Darkness cannot drive out darkness. Only the light can do that." He's absolutely right, and it's why we need Jesus. Now, some people reject Jesus, but John highlights the fact that there are other people who receive Jesus. Verse 12, the good news of Jesus, John said, "Yet to all who did receive him, to those who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God." I want you to know tonight, before you even leave, that if you see the problem of darkness in your own life, the offer is on the table for Jesus Christ to step into your life, to do something for you that allows you to be freed from the darkness so that you could be accepted into God's family. If you've never put your faith in Jesus Christ, then I want to invite you to do that tonight. I want you to know you don't have to live in darkness anymore. You don't have to live with the darkness anymore, because Jesus loves you, because Jesus came for you. He offers you the light that he came to give. Will you pray with me? For those of you who walked in tonight and you came in skeptical, you came in as a doubter, I'm not naive enough to think that maybe I changed your entire worldview or all your beliefs in only 35 minutes. But I do believe that the Spirit of God is so powerfully at work in your life right now that you see darkness as a real problem that maybe Jesus could help you with. And if that's you and you're ready to put your faith in Jesus, I want you to know, man, there is nothing that is keeping you from being able to do that. All you have to say to God right here, right now is, God, I do realized my need for Jesus. I thank you, God, that you came into the world to help me deal with the reality of darkness in my life. But by simply acknowledging your need for Jesus, John, a very close friend of Jesus, says you have been accepted into the family of God. And so I just want to welcome you to the family. I would say let us know that that's a decision that you've made tonight, that you've confessed your need for God, your need for Jesus. And then we'll just encourage you and celebrate you if you fill out that Connect card and inform us about what God's doing in your life. For others of you, you walked in as a skeptic and you're going to walk out as a skeptic. Maybe some of your questions have been answered, but maybe not all of your questions have been answered. What I would ask of you is I would just ask you to come back again next week and come back with another week where you have an open mind. I hope you realize by now as you pray and as you think about what God's doing in your life, I hope you realize by now, I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm not going to beat you over the head with a Bible. I'm not going to condemn you and beat you over the head with religion. I just want to help you fully consider the possibility that you really do need God. For those of you who are here and you really do see your need for God, maybe you're already a follower of Jesus, I just want to ask you to, right where you sit, will you look into your heart and will you be honest about whether or not there's any darkness in there? If there's darkness in your heart tonight, I want to invite you right here, right now, to just pray to Jesus and confess to Him that darkness. Right here, right now, I want you to turn from that darkness and I want you to turn to the light of Jesus Christ, the light of the world. God, darkness is a problem that we obviously could not fix on our own. And so we ask you, Jesus, to go to work, to change our lives, to change our hearts, that we could be freed from the darkness that's in our lives, that's causing so many problems. We ask that you do this in Jesus' powerful name. Amen.